I want to show you something about leadership. When Jesus wanted to build new leaders, he went up to a mountain, spent all night praying. Then in the morning, it says, Jesus called to him those he wanted, and they came to him. He appointed 12, designating them apostles, which means sent ones, that they may be with him and that he might send them out to preach and to have authority to drive out demons. Later in Matthew chapter 10, we have the fulfillment of Jesus' desire to send them out. He called his 12 disciples to him and gave them authority to drive out evil spirits and to heal every disease and sickness. And again, we have their names, and then he commissions them 2 by 2. And so we're going to build a leadership sandwich today, and I'm going to show you how Jesus developed leaders between Mark chapter 3, when he appoints them, and Matthew chapter 10, when he commissions them. In Mark chapter 3, it says that he called his disciples so that they might be with him. First and foremost, Jesus is relational. He doesn't functionalize relationship in order to send them out. He just wants to be with them. But he also knows that the best way to develop a leader is by getting close to them. His presence is like daily bread. And so this relational foundation will be the first part of their development as leaders. It also gives us a clue into the fact that he desires to also send them out so that they might preach and drive out demons. He wants them to engage in a ministry of the word and also a ministry of the spirit. He wants them to share the good news, and he wants them to back it up with miracles. And then he identifies their names, who they are in the kingdom. Andrew, Philip, Matthew, Thomas, James, Judas. And then he begins to model all the things that he will ask them to do in Matthew 10. He preaches a sermon. While he's there with them on the mountain, he preaches the Sermon on the Mount. And this is like Kingdom 101. Blessed are the poor, blessed are the meek, blessed are those who are persecuted. Jesus is turning the Jewish religious establishment upside down and on its head. And he is contrasting the heart righteousness that he requires with the legal Torah observance righteousness that the Pharisees require. Far from being just a new list of rules, the Sermon on the Mount is descriptive more than prescriptive. It is descriptive of what life in the Spirit will look like. Number 2, he heals the centurion's servant with just a word, just on the faith of the centurion. He raises the son of the widow of Nain. He heals the mute and blind man in Matthew 12 by casting out the demons. He deals with opposition. Anybody engaged in supernatural ministry eventually meets opposition. So when he's anointed by the woman, the Pharisees and the disciples oppose him. And finally, they accuse him of driving out demons by the power of Beelzebub. Now there's a pause here in the story because Jesus is about to go back and do everything he just did a second time. So Jesus gets into a boat and begins preaching another sermon. This is the kingdom parables. It's like a small coin that was lost and is found. It's like a treasure that is buried in a field that a man is willing to sell everything he has to buy that field and dig up the treasure. It's like nothing we would expect it to be, and yet it is more powerful than we can ever imagine. He crosses over on the boat and he meets a possessed man in the tombs of the Gadarenes, and he's doing deliverance. He heals the sick woman and the blind man. He raises Jairus' daughter from the dead, and he is rejected in Nazareth. These are exactly the things that he wants his 12 to do. So in Matthew chapter 10, he sends out the 12, and again we find their names, their unique identities in the kingdom. And he tells them to go to the towns of Israel and preach that the kingdom of heaven is near. He had just showed them how near the kingdom of heaven was by healing the sick, raising the dead, and casting out demons. Do what you saw me do. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse those who have leprosy, drive out demons. Freely you have received, freely give. And he warns them that he's sending them out like sheep among wolves. But he doesn't send them unprepared. Because everything Jesus did in Phase IVa was equipping them for this moment, to go out as young leaders, radically reliant on the Holy Spirit for their daily needs and for the supernatural ministry that He was calling them to. In the kingdom, leadership development is not a self-improvement model or some sort of organizational growth strategy. Leadership development is a deeply relational and supernatural transaction in which we are introducing people to the power of the Holy Spirit to do things that they never thought they could do before. I'm not a preacher. Well, guess what? You are now. I'm not a healer. Guess what? You are now. Because as a leader in the kingdom, we all get to do this stuff. These things were repeated within the early church for generations. And these things are for us today. Young leaders growing in the kingdom are inheriting a supernatural ministry to save souls, to transform communities, to raise the dead. If our leadership development doesn't look like this, we need to ask ourselves, why not? Because Jesus laid this out for us as a pattern that we can all follow today in developing leaders, in discipling people, and that's the leadership sandwich.